Welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Chat with Lorin and Robert Sembro.
So, Lorin, share with me one of these awesome stories that you got, because I need one.
They're not awesome. I know we were talking about, selling pet food, and there seems to be, oh my gosh, there's just so much involved, in nutrition and pet food, and the fact that nobody anywhere in the world can agree on what the appropriate, uh, accurate, recommended, perfect food or diet or formulation or recipe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is to feed. Let's just take dogs and cats, for example. And, having had my store for 20 years and then, having been in the industry for 25, you see it all, you hear it all. And it was really interesting to me that it didn't seem to hurt anything to just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. Tell people really what your truth is. They don't have to agree with it, and they can do something else. I mean, a classic example would be, as I evolved through learning about, because all of it is an evolution. Nobody is born knowing anything. But as I evolved through learning about nutrition, it was super interesting when people would come in my store and they say, "Well, which kibble would you feed?" And
I need your answer.
and I would say, "Well, I actually wouldn't feed a kibble."
Yeah.
No. I don't mean, I mean, obviously, let's just take the ones in your store. Which kibble would you feed? Okay. So I carry kibble, the better ones that, I can find, and that's changing as necessary. Because not everybody will feed what I think is what I would feed, or what my opinion is. Everybody's got their own, and none of it is wrong. It's
Right.
just, it can all be improved on. And
And in fairness, and you and I have had this discussion,
we have,
not everybody
because
can, for a lot of different
a
reasons.
lot of reasons, whether it's
And
financial or
yeah,
lifestyle or health or
I've
perception
got
or
I've got a child with the medical reasons
right.
that could not go there full bore the way that I otherwise would have gone. So yeah, so it's not a casting aspersions.
Sure.
It's a, hey, I wouldn't. So that's not
Right.
a proper
So,
question.
it's like, since you
Yeah,
worded it, what would I
yeah,
feed?
yeah, exactly.
It's like, I wouldn't. And they're
Right.
like, well, I mean, of the ones you sell, I, I actually wouldn't feed a kibble at all. What do you mean? I would feed real food. I don't understand. Well, we've had this conversation. That's how we got to this, and you want to stay with a kibble. These are the
Right.
kibbles that I have. I can dial down for you specifically to your needs which one of these would be the best one. They're not all created equal, and I carry them for different reasons, and I think I carried 5 or 6, which is nothing in the world of kibble. Um,
Um,
and and they said, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't feed a kid, because I don't want to feed processed food, which got into a whole different realm, because then it would be like, well, what if you didn't have any other choice? I go, so like all real food went away in the world? I mean, that just doesn't work that way. I feed real food. So, and then it got into, well, what do you feed? And I was at the time feeding raw. And that always made me uncomfortable, because, like, I'm not telling you have to feed raw. You're asking me what I do. I feed raw at that particular time. Currently, I feed lightly cooked. And it was really interesting, because even even a lot of raw food is processed. If you're not feeding that animal as the animal
right.
comes, in some way you're processing it. So, there are levels of processing. But the horror stories that I hear out there, one in particular, we were talking about this before. Um, I'm in a big box store, and they have demo people that come out, and they're trying to tell people, this is why you should feed my brand. And, it's very common
Yeah.
in all kinds of stores. A lot of
In
companies have demo
lots of
reps.
industries and businesses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I try not to pay attention to any of that because it usually gets my hackles up. But I try to keep in mind that what they're doing is, everybody's trying to make a living. So, it's like in everything in life, it's a buyer beware. It's why I don't stand in a grocery store line and judge people for what they're paying for in front of me, that they're getting at the grocery store in terms of pet food. So one particular company, their spiel was, what do you feed? And the customer would tell them, this is what I feed. Person would run off, stay right here. They'd run off, they'd go get that food, they'd come back, they'd turn it around and say, look, we have the exact same ingredients in our food as what's in yours, and we're $5 a bag cheaper, or whatever it was. And I'm sitting there listening to this going, I think I should probably move down the aisle. And the customer said, I think I'm going to stick with my food, blah, 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 and walks away. And there were multiple demo people in the store at the time. And uh, I heard two demo people talking, and the demo person that I was just speaking about said loudly at the time, because I walked out of the store after I heard this. I didn't trust what I was going to say. He said, I mean, what's the worst thing that happens? Their dog dies. We get to start all over with their new one.
Oh my God.
I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm
you would
out.
have to drag me out.
Yeah.
That and what's interesting when you said that is it strikes me because the industry I do most of my work in does a lot of meetings and whatnot, and we talk about we don't it's not a comparison like that, but what I will say is there's a definite difference when you have someone that is just hired for that type of thing, where someone who's much deeper in the business.
Hmm.
And so I'll hear from, the owners of companies, CHROs, CFOs, thank you for being here. Oh my gosh, the things that you shared, just so you know, are not the things that your
Yeah.
folks shared at the other meeting or this or that. And we'd really love to have you at all those, and I can't be at everything. But it is interesting because I thought that's where you were going, in terms of just there's different knowledge levels as well, right? So if you don't know, you go to the lowest, you know point of connection. Oh, the price, which is just a horrible way to
Right.
judge things.
Right.
But to go there, that person should not represent
Oh
any
my
company
gosh.
in the
No,
pet
no.
space. And honestly, if you're the manager of that store and you hear a comment like that, because that attitude's going to come through all day, you got to say like, hey, I don't care, you're out.
Okay, let me
That
just say
Yeah.
the level of that food, it kind of doesn't surprise me,
Mm,
other than the fact that I felt like it was a quality control issue when it came to training. If you didn't interview well, if you didn't ask the right questions, if you didn't make sure that this
sure.
person, you know, people's personal opinions are what their personal opinions are. You're not going to change that. But keeping your mouth shut. I had a rep one time that came in my store and bashed another distributor. The product, I carried his product, but I order it from a different distributor. Well, he didn't like that distributor. He was
Wow.
pushing distributor B. And I mean, he would just trash them to no end. And I finally, he couldn't read the room because I was super annoyed. And finally I looked at him and I said, listen, your product wouldn't be in my store if that distributor hadn't have done what they did to introduce me to your product and answer all my questions, because you weren't in the picture, number one. And number two, it shouldn't make any difference to you where I get your product from. That
Yeah.
I have
Well,
nothing to do with that.
manufacturer that was
Yeah.
bashing.
It was a
Wow,
manufacturer.
that's really unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And And I ended up banning him from my store.
Yeah.
And I would have done the same thing had I been the manager of that other store with that
Right.
particular person. Some people it just doesn't make sense. But it really comes down to, a lot of training that goes on, a lot of what happens. So I was in charge of training for a number of people in the retail side for a company. And it was shocking to me that what they knew was limited to what the rep would tell them when they came in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what they would memorize is the talking points. And so one of the training exercises I went through, I said, so I would take the customer role and we'd role play, and I'd come in and I'd say, you're the salesperson, I'm the customer, so let's go. So I'd walk in. They weren't taught how to ask questions. They weren't taught how to relate to what the customer's needs were and to turn to the appropriate product instead of whatever they're spiffed for, incentivized on, whatever
Sure.
their favorite rep sells, and some of the reps come in and they're very good at rewards and that kind of thing. And that's just part of the selling market and everything. But it's like you're not doing the customer a service, because I would deliberately say things like, well, I don't feed grain, and I think my dog has allergies to some things. And that salesperson would end up taking me over and hitting all of the marketing points of a particular brand. And I'm standing there going, doesn't this have grain in it? And
Right.
after we were done, I go, you didn't ask me the allergies or the sensitivities. You didn't ask me how I arrived at that. You didn't ask me what kind of dog I have. You didn't ask me how old the dog was. You didn't ask me any number of questions that you should ask first if you want to detail something to that particular individual. Because you can have, I had 12 dogs at one time, and not one in the house was like another.
Right.
So to think that I could feed them all the same thing, the same way, with the same ingredients all the time was doing them a disservice. It was a pain in the butt,
Right.
but it was the commitment I took on. And I'm not saying that everybody has to take that commitment, but you go talking about lowest common denominator. Take the animal that is in the worst shape, and you fit whatever you can to that animal, and it probably will be fine for the other ones unless there's a medical issue involved. But if
Sure.
you're looking to negate sensitivities or to eliminate itchiness and those kinds of things, and food is where you're going to start, then go with the fewest amount of ingredients, and try to dial in that one kid, and then you can always add for the other kids.
Right.
But it's the problem that I see nowadays is everybody wants a quick answer. They want a quick fix.
Right.
And I ran through the same thing when I had my stores. People would tell me all the time, nobody's ever told me this before. And it would be an easy thing to bash and say, well, because they're just trying to sell you XYZ. When really what it really comes down to is they don't know. And they haven't taken they're not they haven't gone down the rabbit holes or gotten into a level of immersion that swallowed me up. I mean, I just, I went deeper, 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 because it was like, oh my gosh, you go down this rabbit hole, there's 9 others. And you start digging, and then there's, courses and classes and education and people to, that know more or that know differently. And then you want to take all that information, and then you have to disseminate that, right? You have to be able to adapt that to the individual. So it's frustrating. There was a company that came in, and I used to tag along behind the manufacturer training reps that would come in to talk to employees, because I want to hear what they have to say.
Sure.
And what was frustrating for me is a company in particular that said, we're the first company to ever use this particular type of packaging. I almost said what it was. This particular type of
Yeah.
packaging for our pet food. And I was
Right.
like, I don't think that's right. And I'm standing behind, So I immediately pull out my phone and I put first pet food to use XYZ packaging.
Yeah.
And sure enough, 8 years before the company that was in there was saying that, other pet foods had been utilizing that packaging. So afterwards, I said, so just so you know,
Right.
and his response was, well, this is what my company tells me. I go,
Right.
but
I knew
dude,
that would be the
you,
response.
I know, but this is an easy thing to check. And if somebody checks this, because I check everything, if somebody checks this, you now have gone from whatever credibility you might have had to zero credibility.
Yeah. And you're
So,
you hit on that because, and that's why I'm so adamant about it and jumping in, because it's almost like credibility has been forgotten by,
mm,
I'll just say, a large swath of folks,
yeah,
because you and I have had the expert conversation. Part of that for me is, how much credibility do I give you? And that will elevate you above maybe someone else's advice, or what I'm going to, try first as opposed to 17th, to get something right. And it's that, and folks don't realize how quickly you lose credibility and how hard it is to get it back. And
right.
that follows you for
Yeah,
so long. It's really kind of a lost art, though, and I think that's something that, especially in the pet space.
yeah,
But I mean, you and I could go down the rabbit hole of so many of these brands are manufactured by so few companies
right.
that that is their only pivot. So I also try and have grace sometimes for the folks. And I hate to say it, but if they have something to say to me, I almost it's filtered so much for me. It's going to be hard to reach me. But
Yeah,
I understand I'm a different consumer than most. But
right,
one thing I wanted to hit on too with you on this is, so one of the trends now, I've always been a big, technology guy, and been on that train and board for a long time. And my philosophy has always been, if I can help one person, that's what I'm doing this for. I
right.
don't need to change for the masses. I don't all the rest. But there's someone out there like I was as an individual who needed some real good advice, who needed to hear something that I could, feel good about a decision about. And so I think this, what you're talking about, is also part of the reason that there is this movement and embracing of that direct to consumer. Because I saw, and you and I have had this conversation before, probably several hundred times, of when the pandemic hit, one of the really sad parts of it for the pet world was those people that were passionate, those people that were had a knowledge base, they didn't come back because they had migrated to other industries, professions, careers, etc. And so there was a at least in my experience, and some of the folks out there may not know, I've been involved with a lot of different companies, from supplement companies to toy companies, etc., in the pet space. And there was a lot of time and energy and effort put into what you're talking about, where
Yeah,
I literally would go out, and I would go out with some of the founders of these companies, and we would do the meetings because it was that important, and we would train the staffs, and we'd sit there for hours answering the deepest of deep questions, where even I would go, wow, you may have one customer who walks through the door in the next year with that question. But we took the time and we did that. The hard part is, then that was all gone. Not all gone, but a lot of that was
no,
gone
but a
after.
good part of it. That's what happened to the grooming industry. If you look at
Yes.
that, that's why
Yeah.
there's such a glut for groomers everywhere. They got stuck in a position where they either had to hide or do it, at home, and then people just either moved on or didn't go back or retired
Right.
or any number of things like that. But to go back to what we started off with was with tell the truth. The To wrap up that kibble story. Um, it didn't stop people from buying kibble. When people would ask me, what do you feed? And I go, well, I don't, I wouldn't feed a kibble. I would feed real food and blah, blah, blah. They're like, oh, okay, but of these kibbles, and I go, well, I like them all, or I wouldn't have put them in the store, but let's talk about what your needs are and get down to that. So my issue is telling the truth and listening. They don't, it seems like nowadays, because customers that come in, they don't know what they don't know. And if you don't ask the questions, you can't guide them to that. And one of the exercises I did for staff was to say, you need to write 20 questions. I think I started with 10 because 20 was deer in the headlights. I said, I need question. It can be on anything pet related, and let's go down. We'll talk about that. And I had every individual do it, and they couldn't share their questions with anybody else. In the course of answering a question, we would go in so many other directions, and the rest of the staff would end up grouping around to listen. I mean, I can remember one employee saying, what's the best bowl you recommend for a cat? And I go, oh, let's talk about the best bowl I'd recommend, period. And then let's talk about which one's for a cat, and people were like, oh my God, staff is like, I hadn't heard of that, and why
Right.
this? And what
I
about
love
that?
that topic, by the way. So we're going to hit that in a later
Yeah, it's
episode.
like
Yeah.
ask questions. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's pet related. And obviously, I said it can't be medically related because there's so much involved to
Right.
the individual animal. And I still have those notes. I should pull them and
You
send them
should.
to you
And
because they were
anybody watching or
actual.
listening, send us your 20 questions
Yeah,
because
send us the questions
yeah,
because
I would love that.
and
Yeah.
send us one question, send us 20 questions, it doesn't matter. But when we'll give you a point of view, which also brings up another thing where I'd have clients who, would come to me, they'd be recommended or referred or whatever, and they'd book a consult. My consults were free. And they come in and
Just saying, you
I
used to charge me. No, I'm just kidding.
well, I charged you, um, I did it because I had a store and I knew they were going to end up buying stuff from the store anyway. And in some cases they did. In other cases, I'm like, this is not, you don't need this, and I end up taking stuff out of their hands. But, it was really interesting because I'd get those people who I take all this time, spend all this energy and time on them, and I'd put them in my group, and then I'd answer all their questions in the group, and then they would come back, and there are a few people who did this, and they'd want to tell me about the other three people, including vets, that they would talk to, and I would
Right.
finally get to the point that I'd say, "Listen, here's how this is going to go. You can't do all of these things because none of them are in agreement." So
Right.
find whoever it is that you want to trust and give them 90 days, to do everything that they're recommending you. Don't listen to anybody, don't ask anybody else, don't go in the
Right.
groups, don't ask the questions, don't be polluted. It's just going to create more confusion. Follow them for 90 days. If you don't see an improvement, pick another person because
Right.
you can't take all of this conflicting information, and go with it. I would give people reasoning, support, logic, links, backup, proof, all this, and say, here you go. You take this, you read this. It was like when people would come in and say, this is what's going on with my dog, blah, 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 blah. And I'm writing down everything they're telling me. And then while they're telling me, I'm on my phone and I'm also writing a post-it note and I'm showing them something. And then I would turn it around and I'd slide them the post-it note and I'd say, here's what I'm gonna tell you. You ever heard of vaccinosis? And they would say no. And I'd say, okay, so I wrote it down for you. You go do your own research on it. Okay, but all of these symptoms, when you look it up, vaccinosis in dogs, whatever,
Right.
that's what, see if those symptoms don't match. And they would say, well, can you just tell me? I go, yes, I could, but it's not anything you've ever heard of. You're not going
Oh,
to
no.
believe me.
Yeah.
And I want you to go and realize that it's a real thing. And then you can come back to me. And people
Yeah.
would come back and be like, holy crap. And,
Right.
it wasn't the case for everybody, but when in those cases, it was like, oh my God, what do I do? Okay, so
Yeah.
let's sit down and have a conversation about this.
Yeah. Well, and so many things you just said just sparked me here, but I've seen you do that. I saw you do that at your stores. I think you also gave me, I think I have a wall of Post-its, so thank you. My
Did you
house
ever
was
do
all,
anything with them, or did you just wallpaper?
um, they were good wallpaper. No, I'm just kidding. I trusted you, of course. No, but so, but I think that's so important. But here, the other thing that I wanted to jump on that you just said was, because I often say, people say, and I know you hate the word expert, but they'd be like, "Oh,
I
you're a
do.
pet expert," and I'm like, "No, I'm a connector." I know so many wonderful, knowledgeable people in the pet world, and I would use the example of how I got involved deeper in the supplements. I knew almost all the different supplement people. I had a dog who was really struggling with some health issues, so I tried the supplements, did those, and ironically came to somebody else who they gave me their supplements. I had never even heard of them, met them, etc. Tried them, as you just pointed out, stopped everything else, used that, and I took notes each day. And I compared those notes. And now I could also see what was going on with my dog, because that's the
Sure.
hardest part. And that's the thing I want to drive home to folks is like, time goes by so fast. And people want, to your point, just make it like quick. Just give me the fix. Give me the short. Yeah. Just tell me what to do.
Give me the
And
big pharma response without the
and
big pharma. Yeah.
yeah, and that's not how it works for humans. It's not how it works for pets. Every body system is different. What works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other. And to your point on the what questions, the listening and all that, there's also the observing,
Hmm.
and what's your baseline? And I talk about that a lot in some of the things that I do currently. Do you even have a baseline for you to make any judgments? And if you go back to what you're saying, there is like, tell me about your dog, tell me about your cat, tell me about, what are the issues, what are you
And tell
noticing,
me what you've done, and tell me how long it's been going on.
and
And
how, yeah, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, where did you think you saw some change to the positive, and where didn't you? And to me, that's the interesting thing is, and trust me, I am no guru at it either. Where I will sit there and I can talk to others and nail those things down, but sometimes I don't do it for myself or my loved
the
ones,
forest
etc.
for the trees. Yeah, it's the
It
forest for the trees.
Yeah, and so, but I've really made a effort when I'm trying to solve something to be not just asking questions, listening to responses, but then what did I put into place in action? And then what were the results? And sometimes you can't see the results. And what I mean by that is, I've shared the story of Sugar. And Sugar was my soul dog, titanium leg, everything. And I love, because this struck me earlier when you said this. You go to sometimes the sickest being, and you adapt everything else forward. And because Zoe, her sister, had cancer, and we thought we were going to lose her, we made all these changes and did all these things. I really wasn't as worried about Sugar having cancer at some point. And but so I was giving a modified approach to Sugar while using the supplements and other things that I was using to nurse Zoe back to health. And sadly, Sugar did end up passing of cancer a few years later, but we had no clue, nothing. There was a little tiny tip that I happened to, just when I was feeling around. I just saw this little, it was like so small. It was like the pin of a pen. And I took her in, and I thought, well, let's have this looked at by the vet that I trusted and all the rest. And the vet called me and was just like, hey, you need to come in. And I'm like, okay, yeah, what do we need to do? And I'm calling around to all the cancer specialists I know around the country and all the rest. And Sugar was gone within, really 72 hours. And I was devastated. So to your point as well, of like, I had to go through like, what did I do wrong? What did I not catch? What did I, and that sparks the change, unfortunately,
Yeah.
not necessarily for that dog, but the next. But one of the things I learned in that process was, while I was trying to do so much for Zoe, I was actually doing a lot of positive things for Sugar that I didn't know I was doing until she was gone. I didn't connect the dots until I was speaking to someone that I really respect and was just bawling my eyes out. With all the people I know, with all the knowledge I have, how could I have missed this? How did I not? And this person said, you know, stop, stop. You were doing the things you probably could have done. You just didn't know it because you
Right.
couldn't see inside her. She didn't present any symptoms whatsoever until the last moments.
Well, and there's genetics that I mean,
Yeah.
there's
There's so
nothing you
many.
can do about that. I mean, there
Yeah.
is to an extent. You
Yeah.
can do what you can do to counter, you know, genetics to a certain degree, depending on what we're talking about. But there's just, there's so much that people just want to take the blame themselves. They want to, they think, oh my gosh, it's the number of people that have stood in my store and cried and said, oh gosh, there's this guy that would come in my store. First time he came in my store, my staff was like, this. And I was like, what's the matter? And they said, scary looking dude's in the store. And I went over to him and I was like, what can I help you find? And I mean, he was a monster. He was big and huge. And, he was just the way he was dressed and, everything. It was like, I'd rather just go up and talk to you, than stand around and see what's going to happen.
Right.
And this guy turned out to be just the best because his dog had cancer. And he said, I'm looking for, I don't know, like marijuana or something to give to my dog. And I'm like, okay, don't sell that. And this was before medical marijuana was approved in California. So this is going back a little bit. And I said, but I have CBD. And I
Yeah.
happen to have a very, very, very high quality in syringes. Um, just, I mean, really what you would give in final stages of something like that, right?
Right.
Very expensive. I didn't keep it out. I kept it behind the counter. And because I wanted to be sure that, this was utilized in the right way for the right kind of dogs. His dog lived 2.5 years beyond what they predicted as
Yeah.
best case scenario. And when he came in and bawled his eyes out, a giant guy bawls his
Yeah.
eyes out, and he goes, I know this only happened because I found you. And it's like, we don't know that, but certainly we made her as comfortable as we could make her, which gave her quality of life and continued will, I mean, he had a motorcycle, he took her everywhere, and just really maximized every minute with her, so it profoundly affected him, of course, too, the diagnosis. But I think about what that meant to her for him to take those extra steps. And he goes, I know it cost me a fortune. He goes, I would have, I would have robbed a bank if I'd had to. I'm like, okay, let's not even talk about stuff like that. I get it. I said, but that's how this guy looked. Like he'd have done anything for his dog.
I would have done. I say the greatest gift that Sugar gave us at the end. She knew I would have circled the earth a million
Yeah,
times for her, and she was gone before I could do that.
right,
And Zoe, who I was prepared, because Zoe's a great example like that, lived many years past when they told us she would survive.
right.
And it was such a gift from Sugar. Now it's taken me a long time to say it was a gift, but I've learned through talking with people. And I think that's the other part that I wanted to say too, because I love that he expressed that to you. Because there's this notion of like, and I think we've probably gotten there now in society, but I remember when sugar passed, I was struggling, and one of my coworkers knew I was just, off, not engaged, really, and I told him, I said, I'm struggling. I'm just, this was my soul dog. This dog has been through everything with me, and I've been through a lot. And I saw the tears in his eyes, and he goes, I still cry every day for my dog who passed 15 years ago, who was exactly like your sugar to me.
Yeah.
And we just hugged and cried. And I was like, thank you. I feel so much better. But to your point on the like, hey, I would do the other gift part that sugar gave was Zoe became, you don't want to have a favorite. And I'm sure out there, anybody listens like, you can't have favorites.
You have favorites.
Of course not. I don't have any favorites.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but Zoe, that extra time that we spent with her, to your point on the specialness and the
Mm-hmm.
change. And I think back about that. But yeah, I, I think the other element though that I wanted to call out is number one. I probably scared your staff plenty of times too, so let me apologize to them if they're listening. But the other part of it is that that's why your place was so special. That's why people like me and others would drive an hour and a half to go there. And I think that's one of the elements of when you look at especially some of the independent stores. And I'm proud of those who have made it through, because we were just talking about how many of them lost their key staff people,
Yeah.
hard to bring
The
that back.
talent.
Yeah. And the knowledge base as well,
Yeah,
and
that talent. Yeah.
yeah, because we get hit with so many different, gosh, forbid, go on, and I'm not going to say the platform because I'm so angry at the platform right now that I was just about to mention, but I'll let it go.
Okay.
But you're just bombarded with ad after ad after ad after ad. And we're all searching for answers for something minute to minute. So I have complete grace for all of you out there. The reality is, it's hard to find people to trust and connect with.
Right.
And we just, the anonymity of the internet is something that's just such a double-edged sword. And man, it's tough. So when you find a quality person like yourself and your staff, to be able to tap into that and some of the independence that you and I have come across over the years, that's sadly really missing these days. And that's one of the things that I hope what you and I are doing, and other elements of things that we're doing to connect people with other knowledgeable, trustworthy, people who can help improve instead of take away or judge. And that's
Right.
that, like, if you think you're an expert out there, if you're judging, I don't care what you're an expert at.
Right.
Because you don't walk in my shoes or anybody else's shoes. Share the expertise, not the judgment,
I
and
I used to I used to when life really changed for me at the store was when vets started referring clients to me.
mm,
And I had a vet who called. She was super excited. She had come to me for some nutrition training. And I was like, she came in, she's like, I only have an hour. And I was like, it's nothing I can tell
it's
you
like
in an
vet
hour,
school in an hour.
And I was like, yeah, I was like, that's what you got in school. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Um, but she ended up calling me and she's like, I have a client who's feeding this dog has diabetes. Can you help? I said, I'll help on the condition that it's all three of us working together. And we changed that dog's life. but I had a closer to me vet who would send very difficult clients to me. And one particular client she sent, this goes back to telling the truth. The truth is hard. It's hard to tell, and it's hard for people to hear. But there have been a couple of instances that have really cemented my intentions to do that. Because, for example, I had a client came in from the vet, and he came in with his wife, and he wanted to know where my vegan diets were. And I said, oh, what kind of, not that it matters really, because I'm a dog and cat store, but hopefully you're here for a bunny. What are we talking about here? Well, our dog has Cushing's. And I was like, huh. And so I'm starting to ask questions, and this is a much older couple. And he just wanted me to point him to the vegan diet. And I was like, okay, so hang on a minute. What are you feeding now? Well, I mean, we've been feeding a vegan diet for the last however many years. And I said, I finally get to, and he's very short with me. I finally get to, how did you end up here? My vet sent me over. You can imagine the phone call after he left to the vet, and we're good friends. But I said, sir, I don't carry vegan diets for dogs and cats, and he's like, well, why would she send me here? And I was like, she sent you here so that I could have a discussion with you that I'm sure she's tried to have with you.
Yeah.
And she's hoping that maybe hearing it in a different way or from someone different will make. Wife turns around on her heels, marches out of the store. She's furious. He leaves right behind her. He's mad. He comes back in a couple minutes later, and I said, sir, I said, you don't have to agree, and you can certainly continue to do what you want to do. I do not sell vegan diets for dogs.
Right.
I said, having said that, I work with some vets who temporarily will take meat out of a dog's diet in order to get a handle on some things, but it's a temporary thing. It's not something I recommend personally. It's not something I support. And you won't listen to me either. I don't have anything I can help you with. He turned around and left. I called up the vet and I was like, why'd you do that? And she said, because I'm at my wit's end.
Sure.
And I said, so you were hoping that hearing it, and she goes, exactly. And I said, I get it. He's not going to listen to me either. But it was interesting because, when we got very close, that particular vet and I said to her one time, I said, why is it so hard for vets to tell clients certain things? And she said, it's very difficult because half the time they're not listening. The other half the time, they're extrapolating what it is that they wish they were hearing. And the other half of the time, we can't afford the loss of business. And I was like, well, that's three halves, but I get it. And I said, she goes, that's why I'm grateful you're here. Where it's worked for me in the past is when I told people straight up and they're willing to give something a shot. But where it really worked for me is I had a doctor. I lived in where my store was a big medical community. And so I had a lot of people in the medical field that were clients of mine. And this doctor had 3 dogs, large dogs, and 4 very out of control, young, rambunctious children, male children. And it was a lot. There was a lot going on. So, I could tell that tension and noise and everything was very elevated, because it was elevated in my store, it was elevated in her house, and her dogs got into a fight. The third time the dogs got into a fight, she came to me every time. The third time she came to me, I said, here's what I'm going to tell you. You're not going to like what I'm going to tell you, and I'm willing to lose you as a customer to tell you this. You are not in control. You're not in
Right.
control of your dogs. You're not in control of your children. And I know this because they come in my store and you are just relieved that my staff is chasing them around, telling what they can and can't do. You know, don't run in the store, don't throw that kind of thing. And I said, because it takes the pressure off of you. And I said, I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you what I see. Because you aren't in control and because everything is so elevated in your household all the time, the dogs are going through that anxiety as well. And that heightens whatever is happening between them. I said, so I'm going to tell you that if you want to do the right thing, you will rehome these dogs to someone else. And I said, I'm willing to sit down and go through each dog with you and their individual personalities and what their needs are, because one dog in particular was a very big problem, had already bitten kids, had already bitten her own kids, had bitten other kids, you know, and I said, the liability that you're facing is off the charts.
Yeah.
And you're also doing a disservice to the dog because the dog will end up being put down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's the harm
Right.
across the board.
Right. So I said, if you're willing to listen, I mean, she was just like through the whole thing. And I said, you know, you can do whatever you think is the right thing to do, but I have no other answers for you beyond this going forward. She left. She was in tears. She came back 6 weeks later. She had rehomed all the dogs.
Wow.
She
Okay.
said, I wanted to tell you that I realized how hard that was for you to do. And I said it was, but I had to do what was in the best interest of the dogs. And those dogs were all either going to end up being put down or in situations that were equally as traumatic, you know. And I said, and I couldn't stand by. And you asked.
Yeah.
She rehomed all the dogs, and she was a client for years after that. All the dogs were happy. She kept tabs on them. She facilitated financially, you know, for a little while for the dogs. She then got another dog, one dog that
Mhm.
she could manage, that she could handle, you know, that fit in. And her thing was, well, each one of the dogs belongs to one of the boys. And I go, no, they don't. The
Yeah.
boys are too young. They don't know what to do. You're not teaching them what to do. They're not taught respect for the animals. They're
Right.
wild, crazy boys. I mean, they're just being boys. There's nothing wrong with them either. You
Right.
know, you're not in charge. And you know, she's in a high profile job that takes her out of the house at all hours. And it just was too much. You know, and then there was a client who had never been in my store, and I went out and greeted him, and you know, she's like, "Oh, we saw your store, and we just love our dog so much." And she's going on and on about the dog, and you know, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's great!" And what kind of dog do you have? And you know, and long story short, this was a dog that was so grossly obese
Oh,
that she needed to, you know, and she wouldn't listen to me. She wasn't hearing me. And I said, well,
right.
you're gonna love that dog literally to death sooner than it needs to happen, because 140 pounds for that breed of dog is completely inappropriate. And in all of the cases that I worked with clients and their dogs, I wanted to see their dogs, because oftentimes what the parent sees, the dog parent, I call them dog parents, what the pet parent sees is not going to be what I see. You know,
Right.
the number of dogs that I consider to be overweight, that parents would look at me and they were like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, let me show you." And then I would show them, and then I would back it up with a scientific composition chart, you know, and say, "This is why, you know, and here's the things you need to consider." And if the dog was not eating such a carb-laden diet, you know, I mean,
Right.
carbs aren't anybody's friend. Ours, dogs, cats, you know, anything like that. So, you know, it's a lot of that keep you going through all the times that somebody is beating you up, you know, for their own beliefs that are contrary to yours. And then they come in and they ask you for your opinion and you give it, and then they get angry about it and
Right.
they
Right.
want to dress you down for giving such bad advice. It's like, you asked me, you came in here. I didn't go out in the street and grab you and say, let me give you my opinion.
Uh,
It was like, you came
I,
in here and asked me.
yeah, but I do like that. So, and again, this is another one of the things you and I have talked about. My philosophy in life and where I hope to make a difference is we all want that third decision maker, meaning
Right,
I want to believe in Santa Claus. Someone's going to tell me Santa doesn't exist. So I'm going to go to the third person and they're going to break the tie. And that's how the vet was using you.
right,
And the pet parent doesn't want to, and I'm a big pet parent person, does not want to have to deal with the issue sometimes. I've been there myself. And sometimes, by the way, we're right.
right.
My best friend Bella, they said I needed to put her down. She had a vestibular disease. And I said, give me a moment. And the second they left the room, I scooped her up and walked out of that place. And I've never been back there since. And did all the research and all the rest to make sure I got her through that. And when she has bouts of it, I take it upon myself, which goes back to what you were just saying on the you got to know what you can handle um, at any given time too. Life changes. So sometimes, hey, I
Right.
can do more than I can maybe in the future, or I can do less right now. Um, and your story really hit me too, because one of the harder things I had to accept, um, and I only accepted it when cars were flying past me and people were screaming at me. We had adopted a dog that could, from a sitting position, jump our 7-foot fence. And where we lived was right off a freeway uh,
Oh,
connector and all the rest. And I watched her jump the fence. I had to climb over the fence, which took me much longer than it took her. And I'm running, and she's running right out into traffic. And not the smartest move. I don't advocate it for anybody. I ran right out into the traffic. Thankfully, I don't know how she didn't get hit. I don't know how I didn't get hit, but she stopped right in the middle. And I ran, picked her up, and I stood there as cars whizzed past us. And people were honking, screaming. I'm sure they thought, what an idiot. Unfortunately, that's who I am when I have a being that I care for. They're the most important thing. I make that commitment. I do that. And I remember, and nobody would stop. That's the other thing. Like, you'd think people
ah,
would stop. They just kept driving by. Like, I'm not, like, could you let me get across? I'm holding this huge dog. Um, and so finally, a police officer actually pulled up and stopped traffic. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, the dog got out. I, didn't want her to get hit, and people weren't stopping. And, so it's just kind of one of those, like, I get his frustration, like, hey, get out of the middle of the road, but I couldn't safely navigate. But anyway, but walking back to our house, and I didn't put her back down because I, was afraid she would, I could feel the
right.
tremor. And I just started crying because I knew if I
That you
wasn't,
won the lottery.
well, but if I wasn't there and she jumped, I may never see her again, or worse yet,
Yep.
she's going to get hurt. And so we had only had her that one day. We weren't sure if we were going to foster her, adopt her, etc. I remember calling it, and my wife and I, Sugar, hadn't jumped with her, and I was so sad. And we spent that night, and I was so torn up, so torn up. And the lady from the rescue, came out, and I was like, maybe we could build a 10-foot fence. And, she's like, it's okay. This dog is not meant to be with you. We will
Right.
find the right home. And I'm like, but I want to, and so to, follow it all the way through. And oh my gosh, and the universe works this way. God, however you all want to, look at things. She ended up, and it was not the, phony farm that sometimes animals end up. She ended up going out. Well, you know where I lived.
Hmm.
Corona, there was, plenty of Norco farms and all that.
Right.
And she went to one of these, and I went and visited because I was just so guilt ridden. How could I fail? That's how I viewed it. How can I fail a dog? Um, and I went and saw it, and I was like, wow, you know what? That was not, she was not, and Penny, if you're out there listening, um, Penny was not, um, we were not her forever home. We were a stop on her journey.
On the way, right?
And she was an important lesson for me because I could then, because to that point, I don't know that I could have accepted the message that you gave, or anybody else. So yeah, I don't know. I thank you for sharing that because I think that's special, and we don't get that kind of feedback from folks enough. Is that honesty? It's not great. You know,
If what you do is putting the animal first and foremost, and that was one of the things I used to train. Whatever you do, make sure that you're doing it for the best interest of the animal.
right,
It doesn't matter what it is. If you're selling dog food, if you're, recommending something, if you're teaching something, if you if you've asked enough questions so that you have a good understanding of the animal that you're referencing, as long as what you're doing is in the best interest of that animal, then there's nothing wrong with it. You can't you can't screw it up. It may not be what the pet parent wants to hear. I mean, the numbers of times I've told people, I was like, oh, you know, I really prefer that if you're going to top kibble with real food, that you put meat on there because there's not a lot of meat in most kibbles. Whereas other people recommend broccoli or vegetation or whatever, and it's like, I'd really like to see more meat.
yeah.
Um, if they
And
want to,
by the way, I'm one of those people. I do put meat, but I love cauliflower. I
and I
think
was just
it's
going to say, if they want to do that too,
uh, green.
yeah.
I know someone we both know, um, who uh, I'll just say the amount of vegetables that are at that place that get mixed in with kibble.
Uh,
Uh, but this is a huge place. And it was one of those that I know some other folks that you and I know who were very critical of that. And I was like, how can you be critical of anything fresh that,
real food. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, I get it. It's not the optimal best. Yeah, but you and I have also talked, and I know we're going to talk about this, future times, is sometimes just doing one little change better is as important as anything else you're going to do because
It's
you
a
know,
kickstart.
yeah, it's that little pebble in the water. It just gets
Uh-huh.
things going. And so no, I love that you're saying that because and again, I own it. I'm someone who yeah, my kids like to joke around the dogs eat better than they do. Not true, in case anybody's wondering. But yeah, certainly spend a lot of time. But there are times I'm just like the lady you described. I'm gone. I'm sometimes, for business, I got to travel. And it is very difficult to expect that everybody else in your life or your circle and the care circle for your beings, and that's another discussion definitely want to have with you, is
Right.
that they're going to be able to do it to any extent that you're doing it. So you've got to, over time also have the grace, not just for yourself, but know that it can't be perfect every single time.
Oh my gosh. And
Uh,
people want that. They want
yeah,
that.
well,
They want to know
yeah,
exactly,
that goes back
exactly.
to your just tell me what to do. It's like
Yes.
is that just can't you just give me the little,
Yeah.
pill that I can just okay, great.
Yep.
I've eaten for
Well,
the
I get
day.
that. I used to get that at the store and in my group where people say, can't you just tell me what to do? And I'm like, yes, I could. But
Yeah,
if you learn it, you never need me anymore. If you'll just learn it and if you'll just take a step back, it's like the people, because I cook this way. You probably cook this way too. That don't measure.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
measure.
I don't either.
So, when I cook, I put, people are like, what's in that? And it's like, okay, well, first of all, not only do I not measure, I probably don't make it the same way every time. And my husband, who feeds the dogs currently, is like, exactly how much? I go, there's no exactly. It's food. I'm like, don't overfeed, this is about the amount. If you want to put some of that, you want to put some of that, you want to put some of that. I don't really care. Just don't overfeed them or underfeed them. But most guys are guilty of overfeeding because I swear to God, they look at that little bit amount and they think, I would need more than that.
And I'm so happy you said that, because I want to have, like, one of the simplest, easiest things to do is get rid of the bowl you have. Get the right,
Yes.
even when you brought it up on the cat thing, because to me, that's one of the biggest obstacles, because I'm that guy.
Yeah.
You know,
All
if
guys are.
I say, I look and I'm like, did I short her? I am so sorry, Bella. There is not a lot in there today. Wait a second, that's not your regular bowl. Did you shift
Right.
that out, or did So yeah, no, it's such a good point. And, like, we get in our own psyche and go, well, that doesn't look full.
Well,
And
I have 3-pound dogs, as you know. And so to from a guy's perspective, a grown man, the little tiny amount that you feed a 3-pound dog is like
right,
one bite
yeah,
for a male human, adult male human. And I constantly would go, I'm not feeding you. I'm feeding a dog with a stomach this big,
right,
and well, she ate it all. No kidding. She's a dog.
yeah.
She's going to eat and then she's going to eat
Well,
some more and then she's going to eat
I'm
some
gonna
more.
I'm gonna defend your husband and myself a little bit too,
Of
because
course, I would expect that.
they, you know, Bella will do this thing. I won't say the term that I use when she does it to me, but she'll give me that, like, Tiny Tim, like, please, sir,
Please,
may I
sir,
have
may
a
I
bit
have some more?
more? Yeah, look deep into my eyes before you answer. And I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah,
Completely. But it's not just
yeah,
guys. I mean, because I know I had a lot of female customers that would work that way. And I'd be like, okay, when you go to feed your dog, do not look them in the eye. I'd have to teach them that because dogs are
that's your practical pet tip
masterminds.
of
Yes.
to do
Yes.
not look your pet in the eye when you feed them. That
Because
is,
they look at you like, oh,
yeah.
starving.
Been waiting all day for this. Yeah, no, exactly. So funny. Oh
Oh
my
my
God.
gosh. But yeah, that's it. Don't look at your dog. Just put the bowl down. And it's funny because in my house, I can hear my husband when he's talking to the dogs, like, I'm not in charge, mom's in charge. And they're like, crap. So it's like, how kids work one parent against the other. My
Yeah.
dogs work my husband no end. When he's like, go ask your mom, they're like, never mind. Because mom's not going to give us more treats. Mom's not going to do that. Mom's not going to give us extra. Mom's the hard ass. And it's like, it's out of
Even worse,
love.
even worse than that, I have a bench at the table that we eat at. And Bella will just, first start with the head on the lap. Like, it's okay if you get a little messy with the meal. And if I'm not getting messy with the meal, and I look one way and I turn to the side, I have someone sitting right next to me on the bench. Like, are you sure you need to keep eating that much? I'm a little worried about you. Maybe a few ounces. I can finish this for you. Um, yeah, no, I'm like, I'm awful at that.
We're all suckers for our animals, but I'm not any different. I just have had to learn that it's a tough love,
Yeah.
because I mean, my heart dog, Coco. I mean, what dog needs a car? I drove to Home Goods in Palm Springs where they had a pink car, and got her a car that, runs on a battery and everything else. And she loved it. And she took pictures in it, and I posted them for the
You are
store.
a photographer who literally has 3 warehouses of
Right.
props.
But that's because you did that. You do that for a lot of animals. I did it for one dog. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
if this
that.
dog was a human, she would have had everything on earth she ever wanted because I mean, and as it was, she had thousands of outfits and a car and I
Oh,
mean, just everything she wanted. And I found nothing wrong with that. I mean, people are like, "You bought your dog a car? Hmm. Look how cute she is."
oh
And
my
people
God.
be like, "Okay, uh-huh."
It's like so many things to talk about, and that's why we're doing these pet chats. So that we can just get to common sense, get to practicality, get to, hey, you're not alone out there. And so maybe here's where we end this episode today because, yeah, I mean, I love it. And I have to say, as always, thank you because my energy
Likewise.
spirit is so full and happy right now. So thank you.
Good. Same here.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.